Let's get started here. So my name is Paul Beyer. This meeting is to really understand the pragmatic actions that we can take. So less concerned about the gossip, but figuring out people like Leaf and others who are in production today or about to go to production. Does any of this matter, not matter? People don't know GAI Insights. Jen and I founded it. We've got a great set of AI analysts. Julio and Tim are on the line from this team. We do a lot of interesting things. One is which we meet every day and rate the top 4 or 5 generative AI enterprise stories. We just published a buyer's guide last week, which was fortuitous because there was a lot of confusion last week, and now there's even more confusion this week. And the latest, I haven't jumped on the news this morning, the latest facts, and see if anyone else has got update. I did watch Nadella on CNBC last night. You know, I'm sure there's a lot of pressure for him to be definitive. He wasn't definitive. He said, we love Sam. We love all your customers. We'll support you if they all come to Microsoft, or you stay at OpenAI. We'd work with either configuration. We definitely need a change in governance. And the latest I saw is like 700 to 720 employees have signed a letter to leave unless Sam comes back. And it's still an absolute mess. Does anyone else have any other updates or facts? Or the only thing I saw, there's a New York Times article of a number of customers publicly coming out saying they're going moving to AWS or looking at others. The information, I think that's what it is, said they apparently got a list of 100. I don't know if that's true, and I'm sure there's all kinds of aggressiveness going on at AWS sales reps to get them to convert before the AWS reInvent user conference next week, where they can announce a lot of customers who've converted here. But maybe let's open it up here. Let's so who's in production? So Leaf, what are your early thoughts? Are you concerned, or is this a passing noise, or you can't sleep at night, or?
Well, I think that, through the grapevine, the word seems to be that the leadership at OpenAI would like to be less of a product-oriented organization and more of a research-oriented organization. So if that means that the API service may be degraded over time as kind of hardware moves over to the Microsoft side, that will be a concern for us in terms of our horizontal scalability. I sincerely doubt that they will just turn off their APIs willy-nilly. And if they do, I'm sure they'll provide us with some kind of adequate warning. But my worst case scenario is that I just need to re-architecture all my code to leverage a different LLM, whether that's locally hosted like Llama or Meta's solution, or however, I've already taken steps in case they, OpenAI does turn off their APIs to sign up for Azure's service. So Azure has a OpenAI service. You need to sign up for it. But I'm presuming that it's in Microsoft's best interest to continue leveraging everything that OpenAI has written. And so my thoughts are, I'll be safe if I just move everything over to Azure and stop working through OpenAI directly.
Yeah, that's what we're seeing as well. Others' thoughts, or other people concerned, or?
Hey, Paul. So yeah, with all the paid customers that OpenAI has, I currently, as of today at 12:39 East Coast time, I don't see them turning off their API. That would just be tantamount to we give up, goodbye. And no. So
yeah, I can't imagine. I think it's more for 2, 3. What's your roadmap for the next 3 or 4 years? I mean, are they going to flatline this thing here? We got $1.3 billion in revenue. We'll support the existing legal contracts we have right now. We've got all kind of turmoil. We're committed to our SLAs, and we don't know how much innovation, if any, we're going to be doing in the next 12 months.
And if anyone takes them over, they're not going to want to kill that puppy. They want that revenue stream. So therefore, I don't see them shutting that off anytime soon.
Yeah, there definitely seem like there are very few, like the rational swim lanes that they now have are pretty narrow. And, to your point a second ago, I mean, this whole thing has been irrational. Let's just go there for a second. This has been like, we talk about technical debt, we talk about culture debt, like board debt. This is just hilariously wild. I'm an board debt guy, so I'm not an AI guy. I'm more the, how does this fit into an organization and how do you make it work and not screw it up? Yeah. They screwed it up. This is like Keystone Cops material. It's been wild.
Yeah.
Paul, I think the worst case, you may have seen this announcement. Obviously, others are poaching OpenAI's employees. And Salesforce, I think last night, the CEO said, send me your resume. We'll match the equity offer that was on the table before the announcements here and the chaos, and we'll match it. So you could see a mass exodus in short order to these leading firms that are poaching, top researchers. So that'd do a great deal of damage.
No, yeah, I mean, Benikoff put a tweet out like that. I saw that, and the other thing I read was that the secondary market for all the OpenAI shares completely dried up. So
Yeah.
you're not holding anything of worth anymore, and getting recruiters calling you right and left right now.
There's another aspect, Paul, if you kind of sort of step back from even this OpenAI situation, really the risk of relying solely on one LLM, a private LLM. And, here at OpenAI, the reason why, we're having an issue is, the board and so forth. But you could have a scenario where you're leveraging an LLM and somehow there's some kind of a big issue with it. And now you're sort of dead in the water, or if you can't use it, or for whatever PR reasons, you just don't want to say that you're using that LLM. So I guess I would say, moving forward, I would advise anybody to leverage an architecture that leverages multiple LLMs and where you can sort of switch back and forth. But then that brings up a question, which is they don't return the same results, these different LLMs, because they've been trained differently. So you're sort of like, stuck between a rock and a hard place here. You have to leverage multiple LLMs, but how do you guarantee quality and sort of like consistency of results across LLMs? Not so sure.
Well, and keep going, JC. So we talked about Leaf's situation where he was in production. How about the 1,000 to 5,000 companies that are just made a purchase or about to make a purchase and didn't do a dime yet of development work? Do they stop on 100%? I said differently, who would, if you haven't started a project right now, why would you consider starting a project with OpenAI? Is that too extreme?
Yeah, I agree. Like moving forward, I mean, that would sort of be until this thing sort of gets resolved and there's clarity on what happens next. That would be, putting money after bad, really, the way I see it personally.
I think I'm with Leaf on this one, that the thing to do is to go through Microsoft rather than go through OpenAI if you have to. Microsoft is not going to let this thing collapse. I mean, I suppose there is an outside possibility that Salesforce hires them all. But I think Microsoft has made the same offer, and they have Sam Altman and Greg Brockman. And I think these people, if they're going to leave, they'll probably go to Microsoft. And so I think that's the answer. I mean, yes, the question is right. The points were right that JC made at both levels. First, that it's never great to have a single choke point in your system. And in this case, it's more complicated than usual because the results are qualitatively different, not just quantitatively different across these different platforms. But, we've never learned this lesson. I can't think of a single enterprise that isn't completely dependent on either Microsoft or Google for their internal document structures. And so we do this all the time and never seem to learn that a little architectural separation might be a good idea. And it's a little harder here, but not that much harder if you want to do hybrid clouds. If you do native cloud tooling in AWS, it's very different from Azure and it's very different from Google. So you have similar problems, but they're more tractable than these problems of the LLMs returning really qualitatively different results. But it's the same basic idea that you're just going to have to take it on the chin a little bit if you want to have that isolation. Yeah. So creating prompt libraries and test suites and doing things like that is about the best you can do right now.
Yeah.
Leaf, go ahead. You're on mute. Leaf, we can't hear you.
Yep. So JC raised a really valid point as well. And first, I totally agree with Tim that I think Microsoft is the way to go if you're already kind of drank the OpenAI Kool-Aid. But JC raised a really interesting point that it comes to the point where you need to abstract away the model from the rest of your AI native application. And there are frameworks out there that solve this problem, like LangChain, for example. Everything I've written has been on LangChain. Has been using that. However, I've never had to flip the model from model A to model B before. And so I'm going to now have to go in and write those qualifications and test suites to validate my outputs. We're going to need incredibly thorough test coverage for every single unit where you're touching the LLM to validate that you're getting the desired outputs. And so I think now it's really up to us developers who are working in the space to say, okay, I can't just keep playing and assuming that I can always use this one model. Now it's time for me to write incredibly comprehensive test suites, hone in my prompts, narrow the scope of the outputs that I'm expecting from every single call that I make to the LLM to be as precise and deterministic as possible. Like there's a lot now that being brought onto us in order to make our things model agnostic. We now have a responsibility to write unbelievable test frameworks, probably like 10 lines of code for every line of code that we write with the LLM.
Yeah. Keep me going. Keep me honest on the business side. So, as a non-technical person, business person, say, "Oh, LangChain, that means we can easily plug and play." But it's not zero cost to move a model, even if you do it in LangChain, right? You just went through all the testing you've got to do, and it may be good in theory, but the results are different here. So,
yeah, I mean,
sorry, go ahead.
It's not zero cost, but theoretically with LangChain, you're basically saying, X equals OpenAI. All right, do this stuff with X. And so theoretically, we should be able to just say, all right, X equals this Hugging Face model and continue along. But the outputs are going to be so violently different, I would presume, just because of the model quality. So test cases are going to be key here.
And do you think that because there's kind, like in order to avoid having the OpenAI goes bonkers, we're moving to another model, and now I have to sort of, let's just say a port. I'm not a technical guy, so I'm going to use all the wrong words here, but like port from OpenAI to whatever the next one is. Do you think that organizationally there should be a, like, call it risk management or just agility pre-programming prior? So when a vendor goes nuts, and we do that in other areas of technology all the time, that handover and that switchover is less dramatic and less of an immediate lift on the org.
Oh yeah, I mean, just from a risk analysis standpoint, I mean, it took me a month to get my current organization ConnectBase to go through all the kind of security audits and for us as an organization to decide with the C-suite and the investors that we were okay with having OpenAI touch our databases. And so now we need to go through that same due diligence with every single other model that we choose to leverage. And for me, it's going to be a lot of going back to the board and saying, hey, so sorry about OpenAI. Can we try this one out instead?
Just kidding.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you.
are there other thoughts people have? It sounds like there's certainly consensus if you're not going through Azure, move that over. If you are considering it and haven't started developing it and you trust Microsoft a lot, go through Microsoft Azure if you want to get the incremental benefits of that model and hope they actually continue to improve them over the next 2 or 3 years.
I mean, there was the comment before about now we have to implement test use cases between different LLMs to make sure that LLM A would return the same generally the same information as LLM B. But when you think about it, wouldn't that be sort of a requirement? I'm just kind of projecting out maybe like 4 or 5 years. Wouldn't you want all the LLMs to do that proactively so that we are not, as customers of these LLMs, we don't have to do it ourselves? Because I don't think it's scalable for any organization to do what was just described, sort of test A versus B versus C. It's just way too expensive. And then, I don't even know if people have the AI skills to even implement all of that. Like, what if you find results are not accurate between A and B? What do you do then? You change your prompting and so forth. So I think maybe the industry should be looking at doing that, something like that in between LLMs, Llama versus Anthropic versus OpenAI.
Yeah, well, as part of our research for the buyer's guide, in fact, we talked to companies that are already doing this. So there are at least 2 different kinds of companies that are working in this area. One is companies that are working on validation, so test suites and things like that. Most of them right now are focused on a single model, but I think they're going to go multiple model. The second is routers. So there are companies that are already working with multiple LLMs. And the simplest version is that it's just a pick list. So it's not automatic, but you can pick, use Llama, use OpenAI, use Claude, whatever. So there's a number of companies that are already doing that. And then there are companies that are saying they're going to do it dynamically. So they actually have effectively testing going on dynamically that says your query works best with Claude, so we're going to route it to Claude. And this query works best with OpenAI, so we're going to route it with OpenAI. These are early days, so I have no way of assessing how accurate these claims are. These are claims by startups, so take it with a grain of salt. But I think that's clearly the direction things are going to go in. And I think if they are successful, then my guess is one of the big three, Microsoft, AWS, Google, will gobble them up and offer that service as part of their offering.
But Leaf, as you think about, I suspect you guys are so focused on getting your current models production working well. You felt good about the OpenAI thing. You use LangChain, but that's kind of where your focused are. Now, as you pick up, is it obvious what other model to go to, or is that you got to open the whole can of worms up, or is your particular application you already knew it's kind of close to model A or B?
What I really liked about the most recent development of OpenAI that kind of accelerated things for us is we're using our models to generate JSON output. You know, JSON is just the easiest to work with when your model is saying, oh, I need to talk to this API or talk to this API. I really like that ChatGPT integrated JSON mode. And so now I'm going to have to scratch my head and start looking if there's fine-tuned models that can do this besides just ChatGPT. There's also a quality gap, but I think that because of this shakeup, that quality gap between GPT-4 and the next best model is going to get narrower and narrower and narrower. So this is kind of a good thing for this creative destruction we're seeing here. May end up being quite good for competition and better models coming to the forefront. So I am excited about that. But right now, like the quality difference between GPT-4, especially the newest one with 150K context window, and the next best model, which is probably like Meta's offering, it's just huge, especially with code generation, especially with strictly following requirements for a specific output modality. Like I want this output to be structured CSV. It just honors your inputs so much better than all the other models. So that's my concern.
It's really interesting. So if the most recent models up here, all the other ones are down here, and you trust Microsoft, so you go over Azure and you say, listen here, it's still better. Even if they don't have any new features for the next 12 months, the other ones are still far behind. And as long as I trust that, that's at least solid ice for a while, right? You don't really have to worry about degradation on your application today. You may just have to worry about slower roadmap issues in the future. But
Yeah.
the risk is going away.
I think OpenAI, like just from my experimenting with all the models, it feels about 6 months ahead of everyone else. And, 6 months goes away like that, and especially with these exponential growth curve things, 6 months can magically just become 3 weeks. So that's why I'm optimistic there.
Well, fantastic. Other contributions or ideas, or go ahead, Mike.
So funny thing is, I just saw this post come across. Apparently OpenAI's board approached Anthropic's CEO about top job and merger.
Yeah. Well, remember that the Anthropic folks are ex-OpenAI senior executives, the founders.
Yes, sir.
Mario especially. So not surprising. And that was out yesterday, but
Yeah, it just came across.
As our colleague, we reviewed that this morning, and as our colleague, what did John say? Our colleague John Fiocca said, yeah, your house is on fire. No, I don't think I'm going there.
That's right.
And that's what I try and put into focus or perspective, because yes, this is an event that's significant, but again, the whole technology sector is 13 months and 12 days old. So, the first car that rolled off didn't have seat belts or, turn signals. Okay. Having said that, though, going to what you said, Leaf, hey, look, I got product that's out in production. I can't wait for them to figure this out in 3 to 5 years, right?
Yeah.
And it's that tension.
Again, Microsoft has $13 billion, even though a lot of that, again, is in-kind compute services and things. Still, they have a lot riding on this, and they have infinite resources, literally as close to infinite as you can be. And they're not, my attitude is they're not going to let this thing go down. Their biggest problem, as Leaf was pointing out, is they don't even want it to slow down because they know everybody else is going to catch up. That's the biggest problem here. And this wouldn't be all that exciting except for entertainment tonight, other than it's the most important company in AI, which is a big deal right now. And therefore it's important.
But Tim, keep going with that. But they have more money than God. This is solvable. Go back and double all the employees' salaries and comps.
Well, that's what I said. I think despite 100 companies wanting to hire every one of these people tomorrow, Microsoft is going to do whatever it takes to lock them up. If they are not staying at OpenAI, so I only see 2 outcomes here. There's always, you never know, but there are really only 2 high probability outcomes. The board resigns, Microsoft gets a seat on the board and establishes a different kind of board. Altman and Brockman return and everything goes sort of back to normal, quote unquote. And the other is the whole lot moves to Microsoft and pretty much lock, stock, and barrel. They'll lose a few people, maybe some, to Lee's point earlier, maybe some of the researchers will stay at OpenAI at the original 501c3, and it will become a research institute. But the people who joined OpenAI, the LLC, did not join a research organization. They knew it was a commercial organization, and that's presumably where they want to be. And if Microsoft has Brockman and Altman and says, we're going to create a separate business unit, we're not going to screw around, come with us, I think most of them are going to say yes.
So Paul, if I may, you know, because of where I'm located, I'm also thinking about this from the Department of Commerce and the regulatory side. Is this going to be an argument they bring up and say, yeah, this is why we need your government helping you? Because look what happened to them.
I can't imagine why. I mean, this looks more like incompetence.
So-
Board incompetence here.
Yeah.
But rather than market failure.
Oh, but no, I think it's a good point. Politically, if Microsoft ends up absorbing this physically, I mean, effectively, they kind of already have, because they own 49% and they really have their, you know, to be colorful, they really have their boot on the neck of OpenAI, because OpenAI can't survive without their compute. And so they really already pretty much own OpenAI. But this arrangement, and I bet the reason, I would say one of the reasons Nadella did it this way is it looks better. He is he is just partnering with a research organization that's trying to save humanity and create good stuff. Whereas if they become part of Microsoft, I think it will raise hackles at the FTC about concentration, if nothing else. That this stuff, they're already talking about regulating this and making forays into that area. And this will give them more grounds politically. I'm not making a judgment here. It's not a political discussion. I'm just saying I think politicians will take advantage of that to say, hey, we can't let the second most valuable company in the world already just own this entire space.
No, exactly. And I mean, this is where, if you didn't know, there's something called the AI Safety Consortium that's coming up under NIST to try and figure out, in general, you know, what should be the base rules. But I looked at, you know, what's going on with OpenAI, and it's a case of, oh yeah, you guys remember what happened to them? This is why we, the government, perhaps can't trust them and let the market figure it out. You know, it's a public good now. We can't do this. I don't know.
I think your point, Mike, about the public good absolutely resonates. And that we're headed into an election cycle. It's an easy, like, I'm not picking a side whatsoever. I'm leaving that at the door, but it's an easy, I don't know, it's a terrible pun, political football to grab on this one, right?
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Agreed.
The optics are great if you're a politician. Yeah.
Yep.
Optics are great to make a big deal out of this, even if they have no intention of actually doing anything.
Yeah. So that's where, you know, you're right, Paul. This was they all messed up, shall we say. You know, this is an internal matter that should have never crested the public eyes or ears. Yeah. However, you know, it's going to be up to more people now to want to inject their version, their feelings, their input into how they want it to happen better, stronger, faster. So hypothetically, it doesn't happen to Anthropic in 6 months or someone else. I don't know.
It strikes me that Sam and Greg have tremendous leverage here. So if they thought, maybe they do, like whoever the guy ran WeWork, you know, they could get all the employees in the room and listen to, everyone's going to have a $10 million signing bonus. Greg and Sam are going to start with $150 million. This is the price tag, a $5 billion employee price tag. Take it or leave it. And I don't know if Nadella's got a choice, you know. How high can they go? And Nadella would actually say no if they actually are pulling together, which it could top 20, 30, 40. I mean, there's only 700 of them, Julio.
Some change for Nadella. I think he'll go.
That's what I mean.
To the moon. I think he'll go to the moon. This company was worth $90 billion, and he would have paid that probably to acquire it if need be. So $5 billion is chump change. That's a bargain.
And you heard he was going after Asian financing too. Sam was to try and get something, I don't know what, they just mentioned, yeah, he'd been talking to Far Eastern investors. So I'd like to see what he had planned to do with all that money if he were to raise it.
Julio, if we go back to the alternatives, does this change your calculation? Should it change a calculation for a company that's gone with proprietary closed? Their heads down, they're in production like a few others. Now
You
can take a
froze.
breath. More excited about open source, or is it still use case dependent? Or
I'm sorry, you froze there. I think you're asking about open source versus the alternatives. I
yeah,
think
so right, yeah, so right. So as you pick your head up and start figuring out what you want to do next, if you're losing confidence or you haven't yet, you don't want to jump into the Microsoft thing. Does that open you up more to the open source, or is that still
I think like people have said that the service is going to be available most likely. And so we don't want to rush into things, but I think it's important to look at alternatives, either for latency, privacy, cost even. And there are the open source alternatives. Claude is really nice and has great API. I mean, sorry, not open source. So the proprietary alternatives like Claude has a great API. There are open source alternatives, which gives you the ability at least to fine tune a model for your particular use case. And if you're using a framework like LangChain, it should be fairly straightforward to switch them over, but you're going to get different results. So while we don't want to rush into anything, I think that it would pay to start testing your prompts and your use cases with different models and see how well they work for you. So you have an option there.
Right. And there's some questions in the chat about from Mike and others, Mike C. I'm not going to try and pronounce your last name. Gosh, is it really that big a deal if I'm using RAG and doing human reinforcement and fine tuning, then I just do that on a different model? Yes, that's true to a certain extent. That still costs money. You still have to move to a different model and you still have to do all that over again. But presuming you've done it once and you have a reasonable pipeline, that's straightforward. As Julio was saying, and others have said, Leaf in particular, and this is my experience and everybody I've talked to. So it's qualitative, it's not quantitative. But I have not talked to a single person who's really mired in this in any significant way, who doesn't say ChatGPT is significantly better, not a little better, significantly better than all the other models. That makes a difference. This is why Google won the search engine war, because they were a lot better when they first came out. It was just a little better. It was a lot better. And that counts when you're creating products. So that may ebb over time. It may not be relevant a year or two from now, but right now it's relevant. And also, as Julio pointed out in the chat, they have features that others don't have. As Leaf pointed out, they do JSON already. Most of the others don't. So they're just things that you may want at this early stage that they have and nobody else has. So that's one, which is just, it's better and people want to use the best thing out there when it's really better by a good bit. And then the other is this problem that it's not just like, if I'm doing a database, do I need one parallel disk or 2 RAID stripes, and is it 50 milliseconds faster? It's qualitatively different, the output that you get. Even if they're good, they're just very different. And so you've got to have some way, again, as Leaf was saying, of evaluating. If I switch to Claude and I put exactly the same information in, do I get the same information out? The answer is absolutely not. But the question is it close enough that it will serve my use case? And you're going to have to figure out how to determine that if you're going to switch between models so far right now. So those are the two big issues to me. It's just the superior capabilities of the product and the fact that you really have no trivial way, there's no quantitative, simple way of just determining that you're getting the same quality of output from model B that you get from OpenAI.
Just to speak to the quantitative side of things, we can, with the JSON output, my test suites got pretty close to giving us some kind of a deterministic way to test these things, where let's say, I have an address formatter and my users are constantly putting addresses in different formats that are slightly out of order, or they forget the zip code or something. Well, my address formatter bot, looks through that input, which is the malformatted address, and then gives me a JSON output saying, primary address is this, secondary address is this, area code is this, town is this, country is this. You can if every model would give me a JSON output, then I could very easily say, this is my expected JSON that I want to get back, and it should be the
Yeah.
same every single time. I mean,
Yeah.
that's kind of the direction that I was moving in. It's just we don't have another model that gives us a concrete JSON output every time.
Yeah, and it still depends on the use case. So that's a structured output use case. It's fairly straightforward. But if you're trying to generate PR releases, news headlines, blog posts, those are more complicated, let's say at the least, to compare from Model A to Model B.
Yes.
for output.
I'm just sensitive
Code
to-
generation, even I would say, is not trivial to, compare from one model to the next. But again, my experience, I will say in that front, is that ChatGPT is a good bit ahead of the others in code generation.
I'm sensitive to time. Are there any other major comments or contributions or questions? So we'll wrap then. So thank you, everyone. Have a good Thanksgiving week, and thanks for jumping on the call. And hopefully this was a
holidays.
valuable conversation. Thank you, everyone.